You can have main event of the evening.
These days are
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today, we will be discussing Season 5, Episode 6, Fonselectomy. I love that title so much.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in Fonselectomy.
We open it at the Cunningham house, where Fonzie is sleeping on the couch being visited by a doctor, while Howard and Marion watch.
Get this prescription filled, have him take 2 every day.
The doctor says Fonzie has to go to the hospital tomorrow to have his tonsils removed. Marion is dismayed that Fonzie will miss the Halloween party. Richie and Joni come downstairs as Fonzie wakes up and says hoarsely,
"I'm not going to the hospital, and I'm not having my tonsils out."
Howard says he knows what Fonzie is going through. He had his tonsils taken out 3 years ago. Joni adds those were the 2 quietest weeks of her life. Richie says he and Joni had their tonsils taken out years ago, and his throat is just starting to feel better. Fonzie does not find his attempt at sickroom levity funny. As Fonzie silently gets up, with Richie translating his gestures of goodbye and final declaration that he's not going to the hospital, Marion snaps that yes he is. The doctor says that Fonzie has to have his tonsils out, and that's going to happen if Marion has to take them out herself. Tomorrow, Fonzie is going to the hospital, and that's final.
Fini Caputamundo!
The next day, true to Marion's word, Fonzie is at the hospital. Unfortunately for him, the only available bed is in the children's ward, and he has to wear a hospital gown. On the bright side, his voice is back, so at least he can complain to Richie and sass the nurse when she asks him where his slippers are.
Now where are your little slippers?
With our robe.
Later, the other 3 children in the ward, Russell, Patrick, and Allison, invite Fonzie to play Tiddlywinks. Allison says Fonzie is probably stinky at it, so Fonzie tries to prove her wrong.
Are you kidding me? This tiddle'll fly.
When he fails, he blames the wind. In come the visiting Ralph and Potsy, wearing their respective Halloween costumes of the Lone Ranger and a devil. Fonzie is personally offended by Ralph's costume. He was going to be the Lone Ranger. He shows his displeasure by removing Ralph's mask, much to the horror of the children.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
You don't remove the Lone Ranger's mask. The nurse comes in, declaring that Jingles the Clown is in the sunroom and he wants them all to have a Jingles good time. The children happily go to see him. Fonzie doesn't join them, despite the nurse telling him he's got Tinker Toys. Ralph and Potsy try to comfort Fonzie over missing the party, saying they never make out that well.
Oh, Fonz, it's a little party. You're not going to miss anything good, really.
Fonzie says that's a good reason for them not to go. Now tell Fonzie why he shouldn't go. The 2 of them leave after Potsy tries to sneak off to see the Tinker Toys. Donning Ralph's Lone Ranger mask, Fonzie sits on his bed and forlornly hums the William Tell Overture. Back at the Cunningham house, Richie, in his Cyrano de Bergerac costume, is play fencing the chair with his sword.
On guard! Take that, you swine!
Howard, dressed as King Henry VIII, comes out of the kitchen with a turkey leg. The doorbell rings. It's a little girl in a bathrobe and curlers, trick-or-treating as a middle-class housewife.
Well, how about it? Do I get a treat or do you get a trick?
She takes Howard's turkey leg as her treat and runs off. Howard is distraught. How can he be Henry VIII without a turkey leg? Richie hands him a banana and says to be King Kong. Howard doesn't find it funny. Joni comes downstairs as Snow White.
Who's the fairest of them all?
Howard says she looks beautiful, and Joni compliments his costume. Although his pillow's a little crooked, Howard says he's not wearing a pillow. As he goes to the kitchen, Richie realizes he forgot his nose and goes upstairs to get it. The doorbell rings, and in comes Al in his ghost costume. Chachi follows him in, dressed as a prince. A car horn honks. It's Jenny Piccolo's parents, there to pick them up for the party. Joni can't wait to see Jenny's costume. She's Lady Godiva. As the 2 teens leave, Marion comes downstairs in her Anne Boleyn costume, and Richie in his fake Cyrano nose. As they're about to leave, Fonzie's date Sophia is being taken by Ralph. Fonzie comes in wearing his jacket over his hospital gown. Al, embarrassed at the gown's similarity to his costume, leaves.
I'm going home and change my shoes.
Fonzie just wants to go to the party and says he'll be back to the hospital tomorrow morning. None of the Cunninghams like this idea, and they like it even less when Russell, Patrick, and Allison show up, having followed Fonzie.
You're dressed as little hospital patients.
Mom, they are little hospital patients.
Fonzie tells them they could get sick. Allison points out they're already sick. As Howard and Marion take the 3 kids back to the hospital, Richie says he'll take Fonzie. Fonzie refuses and says he'll just wait here for Sophia. Richie says Ralph took her. Fonzie's not happy to hear that, but Richie makes him sit back down and listen. Fonzie is sick and could lose his voice permanently. He has no say in the matter. He can't control when he's sick. Fonzie reluctantly agrees to go back to the hospital. Back in the ward, one of the kids calls Fonzie a drag. Dismayed, Fonzie says he's taking the kids trick-or-treating. They may be in a hospital, but where there's a door, there's a trick-or-treat. Later, the kids are happily going over their hauls. They got Band-Aids, cotton balls, even some wooden sticks that you stick down your throat. Fonzie got nurses' telephone numbers. Fonzie then gathers the kids around for a ghost story and tells them about 3 kids, coincidentally also named Russell, Patrick, and Allison, trapped in the woods during a rainstorm who go into a haunted house. He does voices and everything.
If this log rolls over, we'll drown.
It's great. Afterwards, the kids go back to their beds, and Allison tells Fonzie she's glad he's sick with them. Then Fonzie calls the nurses' station to arrange meetings with the nurses tomorrow. A week later, the Cunninghams are having dinner. Dessert is pumpkin pie, much to everyone's annoyance. They've been having pumpkin all week.
I've had pumpkin up to here.
Pie, cookies, ice cream. Howard asks how he was supposed to know that the prize for best costume was 50 pumpkins. Marion tells Howard to drink his pumpkin juice.
Thank you, Peter. That was Fonselectomy, which first aired back on October 25th, 1977. That night, Happy Days served as the lead-in to a brand new Laverne and Shirley, in which Laverne is attacked by a toy robot in a department store. Over on CBS, there was a special Halloween episode of The Fitzpatricks, and NBC, having already given up on the Richard Pryor show, debuted a new series against Happy Days. This time, they went with Man from Atlantis, starring Patrick Duffy as the last known survivor of the sunken city of Atlantis.
A deep ocean storm carries a strange being to shore, and he nears a death that medical science cannot stop, until a marine scientist returns him to the ocean and makes him live.
Fonselectomy was directed by Jerry Paris, and it was written by Marty Nadler. The most recent of Marty's episodes that we covered was Fonzie's Old Lady. Marty was an executive story editor and executive script consultant at Happy Days. These days, he's ostensibly retired, but he still works occasionally as a script doctor and stand-up comedian while also writing plays and short stories. As for guest stars this week, we have Len Lawson as Dr. Stack.
Mr. Cunningham, there's no more time. He's got to go into the hospital tomorrow. I hope you understand.
Len had a mildly successful career in TV and film from the mid-70s to the mid-90s. His movies include War Games, Cheech and Chong's next movie, California Suite, The Jane Mansfield Story, and S.O.B. On the small screen, he appeared on Little House on the Prairie, T.J. Hooker, Tabitha, and Mrs. Columbo. Peter, what did you think, if anything, of Len Lawson as Dr. Stack?
I thought he came across as very professional, very matter-of-fact, very sensible, which is a good call because Fonzie is probably not a great patient, given that his response to needing to have his tonsils taken out, or he could permanently lose his voice, is to have a little fit. So he's a very good straight man. Good for him.
I think the last time they had a doctor come to the house to look at Fonzie, it was in Fearless Fonzarelli when Fonz hurt his leg.
Right.
And that doctor actually got to have a little bit more comedy in what he did. He got to actually get angry with Fonzie and have a little head-to-head confrontation with Fonzie. And Len Lawson doesn't get as much to do, but he does well with it. We also have Donna Ponterato as the nurse.
Now, do we have our bathrobe?
No, we don't have our bathrobe. I got one. It's home.
A film and TV actress from the Bronx, Donna was a regular on 3 short-lived series, Joe and Valerie, Flatbush, and Report to Murphy. She also guested on Laverne and Shirley. Her movies include The Negotiator and Jumpin' Jack Flash, which was directed by Penny Marshall. On TV, she's been seen on ER, Will and Grace, Third Rock from the Sun, Night Court, The Love Boat, Doogie Howser, Rhoda, and much more. What did you think of Donna Ponterato as our nurse?
I like that she came across as a little bit grumpy, and she's not really what I would have expected from that, because on the younger side, she's very pretty, and usually that would make her an easy mark for Fonzie's Fonziness. Instead here, they're mildly antagonistic to each other at the beginning, and then she tries to invite him to come see Jingles the Clown, which I really liked, because if she hadn't been a typical one-off interest of Fonzie's, then I think it would have been less funny.
Yeah, I think Donna Ponterato is against the grain in that she seems immune to Fonzie's charm.
Although he's not really trying, I guess that needing his tonsils out has maybe thrown him off his game a little. At least until the end.
Right, when he seems to be flirting with every other nurse in the hospital. We have lots of cameos by family members in this episode. This was a real family show. Tom Bosley's daughter, Amy Bosley, appears as a trick-or-treater.
I'm dressed as a middle-class housewife.
Amy had previously appeared in the episode Fonzie's Hero. She's now known as Amy Bear and is a film and TV producer. Peter, did you notice Amy Bosley in this episode?
Yeah, she was very amusing, and I liked seeing her there a lot.
I like her housewife costume where she has her hair in the curlers, and she's in the bathrobe.
And what makes it so great is that it's exactly the kind of costume that a kid would come up with. So I thought that was very clever.
I had to wonder about her taking that turkey leg.
Yeah, it's a weird choice because is she going to put that in her bag? That's not very sanitary. Or is she just going to carry it around for the rest of the night?
Maybe she didn't think that one all the way through when she stole that turkey leg, but it's still funny. Marion Ross's daughter, Ellen Meskimen, plays a candy striper at the hospital.
Dr. Dursley? Dr. Dursley?
Yes, nurse?
You're not a doctor.
No, but you should see me operate.
Now known as Ellen Creamer, she's a very successful TV writer and producer whose credits include Friends, The New Adventures of Old Christine, I Hate My Teenage Daughter, Trial and Error, and American Housewife. Did you notice Ellen Meskimen as our candy striper?
Yeah, she didn't have a ton to do, but it was nice seeing her when she showed up.
Yeah, it was a cute little scene, even though it was with Chachi. Two of the sick kids, Patrick and Allison, are played by Gary Marshall's real kids, Scott and Kathleen. They had both been in Haunted and Fonzie's Hero. The third sick kid, Russell, is played by an actor named Greg Forrest. As far as I can tell, Greg was just a child actor who worked in TV in the late 70s. He guest starred on Chips and Little House on the Prairie, and he was a regular on the Bad News Bears TV show. So what did you think of our three sick kids?
They were pretty good. They were better as being the ones who prompt Fonzie to get out of his funk and try to have a nice Halloween regardless of whether he's stuck in the hospital with tonsillitis. I thought that they were pretty good at that, and there is something incredibly funny to me about Fonzie trying to impress them with his rad tiddlywink skills and failing and having to blame the wind for why he sucks at it. That is hilarious to me. So good job, Allison.
I think one of the interesting things about this episode, sort of a sub-theme of this episode, is that what's cool to one generation will not necessarily be cool to the next generation. And this is maybe the first inkling that Fonz has that another generation is already coming along that will replace his generation.
I used to be with it, but then they changed what it was. Now what I'm with isn't it, and what's it seems weird and scary to me. It'll happen to you.
That's something that everybody has to go through. You think of yourself as being young and cool and into all the cool stuff, and you eventually realize, oh, there's another generation, and they're into something else. These kids in the hospital, they're going to grow up to be the hippies of the late 60s, early 70s. They're not going to be into that 50s greaser scene of Fonzie and the gang, and they're going to think that that's old-fashioned and uncool. And this is Fonzie's first indication of that happening.
You got a lot more out of this than I did.
Well, I watched this episode a few times through for review, and that's what I started thinking about. The best thing I can say for the acting is that two of these kids are just Gary Marshall's kids, and then the third was a kid actor. And I couldn't tell a great difference between the performances. I thought they were all pretty equal in terms of talent and line reads.
Yeah.
So
they were believable as sullen, sassy little kids in the hospital.
None of them seemed to have any actual health problems that would preclude them from escaping from a hospital. That's another thing. This hospital has terrible security measures, but maybe that's what hospitals were like in the 50s. As for songs this week, not really any in the version that I watched. Fonzie sings a bit of the Lone Ranger's theme music, which is taken from the finale of the William Tell Overture, composed in 1838 by Gioacchino Rossini. As for cultural and historical references, tonsils are oval-shaped pads located at the back of the throat. Despite popular opinion that they are useless, tonsils are actually important in stopping germs from entering the body through the mouth and nose. They also contain germ-killing white blood cells. Humans have 4 types of tonsils: palatine, tubal, pharyngeal, and lingual. Palatine tonsils, located on the left and right sides of the throat, are the ones most commonly removed due to persistent infections. Tonsillectomy, i.e. the surgical removal of the palatine tonsils, used to be more common as a treatment for tonsillitis.
Though I'm grateful, I've a rate for tonsillectomy. Sick and healthy, poor and wealthy, come direct to me. But they never send a check to me.
The procedure is now considered a last resort for those with frequent tonsillitis who don't respond well to other treatments. I will ask, have you ever had a tonsillectomy?
I have not.
Do you know anyone who's ever had a tonsillectomy?
I think one of my parents might, but I don't know for sure.
I think they are going to become less and less common as time goes by.
They're basically going to go the way of the measles. You know how a lot of TV shows will have a chickenpox episode where it'll be like, here's this kid who's going through the universal relatable experience of having chickenpox. When I was a kid, those episodes really confused me because they made me think that I was going to get chickenpox someday. And my mom basically had to tell me, no, you've been vaccinated. You're never going to get the chickenpox. That's probably for the best. Let's make some antiquated medical treatments go extinct.
It's a loss to sitcoms when things like that go away, but it is a benefit to the human race. So
yes.
Bozo the Clown is mentioned. Bozo the Clown has a rather convoluted history. Created by Alan W. Livingston in 1946, the character first appeared in a book and record set.
Hello, I'm Bozo the Clown. I'm going to take you on a trip to the circus.
The character then started appearing in comics and on Los Angeles TV, where he was originally played by Pinto Colvig. That's a name that should stand out to our Disney aficionados in the audience.
Yeah.
But then in 1956, Larry Harmon bought the character and turned it into a franchise. There were different local Bozo the Clown shows in cities across America, most successfully in Chicago, where he was played by Bob Bell, starting in 1960.
Stand by, we're all ready to play Bozo's Grand Prize! Yeah!
As far as I can tell, Milwaukee never had its own Bozo, but Green Bay did. Jerry Drake played the character on WLUK there in the 1960s. Tiddlywinks is a board game going back to 1888. The object of the game is to flick small discs called winks into a pot and prevent your opponents from doing the same. For some reason, Tiddlywinks became extremely popular at the University of Cambridge in England in the mid-1950s. The version being played here is Jumbo Tiddledywinks from Milton Bradley, manufactured in 1974. The box actually says from ages 5 to adult. I mention that because in the episode they say it says from 6 to 60. We have talked about the Lone Ranger, Tonto, and the term Kimosabe many other times in this podcast. For now, I will say that Ralph's costume is very accurate to the 1950s TV show with Clayton Moore, except that the Lone Ranger's neckerchief is usually red, and his shirt shouldn't be unbuttoned that far.
It's like he's wearing a sexy Lone Ranger costume, like the ones they sell now.
Also, Ralph slightly misquotes the opening narration. He says, "The thunder of hoofbeats, a cloud of dust, and a hearty hi-ho," when he is interrupted. The real line is,
"A fiery horse with the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a hearty hi-yo silver."
And it only occurred to me now that the Lone Ranger TV show was actually one of the first hits for the ABC TV network. That may be the reason why there's so many Lone Ranger references on Happy Days.
Huh.
When Ralph says he pulled the mask off the Lone Ranger, he is probably referencing You Don't Mess Around with Jim, a 1972 hit for singer-songwriter Jim Croce.
And they say you don't tug on Superman's cape, you don't spit into the wind, you don't pull a mask off an old Lone Ranger, and you don't mess around with Jim.
George Francis Gabby Hayes was a circus performer turned actor from New York who started working in film in the late 1920s. He hit the big time when he grew out his beard and started playing cantankerous old coots in B-westerns alongside Hopalong Cassidy, Roy Rogers, and Gene Autry.
Oh, leave me alone. I ain't had so much fuss made over me since the mule kicked my teeth out.
Tinker Toys were created in 1914 by a man named Charles Peugeot, who formed a company in Evanston, Illinois, just to manufacture them. They're construction toys for children, allowing kids to use their imagination and build whatever structures they want. Today, the brand is owned by Hasbro and is available in both wood and plastic versions. Each set contains wheels, caps, pulleys, sticks, and couplings. Richie is dressed as Cyrano de Bergerac, a French nobleman who is a gifted poet and duelist, but who is cursed with an oversized nose. The character first appeared in a play from 1897 by French dramatist Edmond Rostand, who based it on a real guy. The 1950 film version, which won an Oscar for Jose Ferrer, has since become a classic, despite being a box office disappointment when originally released. Howard is dressed as Henry VIII, who ruled England from 1509 until his death in 1547. The corpulent king is sometimes depicted in cartoons and comedy sketches with a turkey leg grasped in his hand. But where did this image come from? No classical portrait of Henry contains a turkey leg.
I think it might be symbolism, because Henry VIII, I think, is characterized by his inability to moderate. This was a man who got married 6 times, who had dozens of mistresses, who basically did whatever he wanted, and nobody could stop him. The man started his own church because the Catholic Church wouldn't let him get divorced. So basically, I think that the turkey leg is handy symbolism for a man who, if he wants to carry around a turkey leg, he's going to do that.
The tradition of Henry VIII holding the turkey leg may have actually started with a 1933 film called The Private Life of Henry VIII, in which Charles Laughton eats a chicken drumstick.
Have we no singers at the court?
King Kong should need no introduction, but the oversized gorilla had just gotten a big-budget remake in 1976 with Jeff Bridges, Charles Grodin, and Jessica Lange.
Dino De Laurentiis presents the most exciting original motion picture event of all time. King Kong.
For 1970s kids, that was their King Kong. So maybe that's why they're having a King Kong reference in this episode. Joni's Snow White costume is clearly based on the 1937 film from Disney called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, except that the original Snow White's dress has a blue bodice with a yellow skirt. Do you think they were trying to avoid copyright infringement with the orange bodice and the purple skirt?
That's what I would guess. Joni knows that the Disney lawyers are notoriously litigious, even in the 1950s.
And by the way, Richie, Snow White never went to a dungeon.
Better watch it, Snow White, or you'll be sent up to your dungeon.
I'm not sure what he's thinking.
Richie is weirdly jokey in this episode, like he's constantly cracking these dad jokes, which is weird because that's usually Ralph's thing. So, I don't know what Richie's doing.
Well, maybe it depends on who's writing him that week. Maybe Marty Nadler thinks of him as cracking a lot of dad jokes. Shirley Temple was an enormously popular child star of the 1930s, known for such films as Curly Top and Heidi. Her film career slowed down in her teens, and she was basically retired from acting by 22. She later became a diplomat, serving as an ambassador to Ghana and to Czechoslovakia. There was no dwarf named Pushy. The story of Snow White was first published in 1812, but the dwarfs weren't given names until a 1912 play in which they were called
Flick, Flick, Glick, Snick, Pick, Whick, and Quee.
The names that we know are from the 37 film.
Yeah, I'm glad for that.
Chachi says he's going as Prince Charming. This is a stock character from numerous fairy tales originating mainly in France and Germany. The princes in Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, and Cinderella are basically interchangeable, and none is given a specific name in the original stories. In the 1937 Snow White film, Snow White says,
"Anyone could see that the prince was charming."
But that doesn't necessarily mean that the character was named Prince Charming. So where did that name come from?
Anyone could see that the prince was Steve.
Exactly. She wouldn't say it that way if it was his real name. Now, Oscar Wilde might have been the first to use it in his 1890 novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, where it is applied ironically to Dorian. Around the same time, a guy named Arthur Lang was retelling fairy tales in the Blue Fairy book and the Green Fairy book. He had characters called Charming and King Charming. Neither of those is quite Prince Charming, but they're close. Lady Godiva was a real countess in 11th century England. She was married to Leofric, Earl of Mercia. They were wealthy landowners, and Godiva encouraged her husband to be generous with his money. A popular legend from the 13th century has her riding nude atop a horse to protest her husband's high taxation of his tenants. Nothing of the sort ever happened, but this story is still where we get the term Peeping Tom, referring to the one man in town who dared to look at Godiva as she rode. Anne Boleyn was the second of Henry VIII's 6 wives. Henry had her tried and executed for high treason in 1536. Her death helped spark the English Reformation, and she's considered a martyr to the cause. So it is very weird that Howard and Marion would be going as Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn.
It's so weird. It reminded me of a song from The Drowsy Chaperone, Love is Always Lovely in the End.
'Twas a happy fate for Hank the Eight and Anne Boleyn. Love is always lovely in the end.
I must point out, madam, that Anne Boleyn lost her head.
Yes, she was in love.
Where the woman singing it lists off a bunch of famous couples, and they're all couples where it ended badly for them. Romeo and Juliet, Samson and Delilah, and Henry and Anne. Her butler has to point out, hey, Anne Boleyn lost her head because Henry ordered her executed because she wouldn't give him a son.
It's very odd that Marion would apparently choose that as her own costume.
Yeah, although Henry VIII doesn't really have that many healthy relationships. He divorced Catherine of Aragon, Jane Seymour died, and Henry's response was, aw, she's dead and I can't go hunting. He divorced Anne of Cleves, he had Catherine Howard executed, and then Catherine Parr outlived him and married someone else.
There's not a lot of great choices there, so maybe she just went with the most iconic of the wives. Fonzie refers to the sick kids as wise guy munchkins. The term munchkin was coined by L. Frank Baum in his 1900 children's novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Back at the hospital, one of the kids wears a mask of the Incredible Hulk. This particular mask was manufactured by the Ben Cooper Company in 1966 as part of its comic book hero line. Ben Cooper is the same company that also marketed a Fonzie costume, complete with mask.
The Incredible Hulk didn't show up in comics until 1962. Would this episode have to take place in October of 1962? Or is the result of time travel?
I'm being generous by saying that this is from 1966 because towards the end of the 70s, Ben Cooper re-released this costume because of the Incredible Hulk TV show. But yeah, there's definitely holes in the space-time continuum in the Happy Days universe. Once upon a midnight dreary is the famous first line of the 1845 poem The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe.
Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary
over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore.
The poem was very popular in Poe's lifetime, and it brought him fame, but no fortune. He died alcoholic and broke 4 years later. So tough luck, Edgar Allan Poe. Pumpkin pie is a well-known dessert, of course, but pumpkin ice cream, pumpkin cookies, pumpkin pudding, and even pumpkin juice are all real recipes. Pumpkin juice is said to taste like apple cider. It is mentioned occasionally in the Harry Potter books. Had you ever heard of any of those other pumpkin recipes?
I had heard of pumpkin cookies and pumpkin ice cream, but not pumpkin pudding. That just sounds gross. But then again, I'm not really a pudding person, so I'm biased.
Other observations. Now, at the beginning of this show, the characters are being very vague about Fonzie's illness. There's this tense music on the soundtrack, and we are led to believe that it may be something life-threatening for Fonzie. Are they deliberately trying to mislead us, or is this just a joke about how dramatic Fonzie is being?
I'm inclined to say it's a joke about how dramatic Fonzie is being, because he spends the rest of the scene gesticulating wildly and silently, because that's just the way Fonzie is.
He reacts big to everything, and this is how they're presenting that at the beginning of the show. The only clue that it's not something serious is the fact that Howard doesn't seem to be taking this very seriously.
Although, good on Marion for reading Fonzie the Riot Act and making him pull his head out of his ass.
This was another great moment for Marion. She just has to be the one sensible person in this household. The writers at least remembered that Howard already had his tonsils taken out in season 1, but did they forget that Fonzie also had his tonsils taken out? Did the tonsils grow back? What happened to Fonzie's tonsils?
Maybe they did. Maybe he's some kind of mutant.
That's the only explanation I can think of. This is a big episode because Marion also gets her first amundo, kaput amundo, which I thought was quite a delightful turn of phrase.
She's so great.
Kaput amundo!
Dr. Curtis. Dr. Curtis.
Well, Fonzie, this was the only bed available.
Now, this is the first episode in a while to make use of those doo-wop style musical transitions between scenes. I was so glad to hear them again. I thought the show had kind of given up on them. And for a guy with tonsillitis, Fonzie is incredibly talkative, even loud before the operation.
I guess they didn't want to write an entire episode of Fonzie being hoarse and or silent, even though I think that would have been a neat experiment. And also, it kind of makes the stakes feel lesser because Fonzie seems just fine for the rest of the episode. I guess it would have made it harder for him to bond with the kids, but they could have found a way. They could have written it differently.
What you brought up was something that I wanted to see from this episode, which is what happens when Fonzie loses his voice and he has to mainly communicate through gestures, facial expressions, etc., and he doesn't have his voice to rely on. But that would have been maybe more difficult to write, and Marty Nadler was just like, hell with it, I'll just have him talk through the whole thing. Chachi is carrying a bag labeled Chachi's Hospital Gift Shop. I had completely forgotten that selling stuff out of bags was one of the hallmarks of his character, because that was in the last episode too. Is that what Chachi does, is sell stuff out of bags?
Yeah, pretty much. And also creepily hit on Joni.
Why had I completely forgotten the selling stuff out of bags?
Well, it basically gets dropped completely in later seasons when they started to push Scott Baio more as like a heartthrob.
Oh, God. Heartthrob.
I'm so sorry.
The Happy Days characters go to a fair number of costume parties, I think you would agree. And the costumes are always excellent, maybe a little too good to be believable, which is why there is a badly dubbed line from Howard explaining that the family's costumes come from the college theater department.
That was a great idea, borrowing these costumes from the college theater department for the Halloween party.
They have access to the Paramount costume department, and so they can get perfectly accurate costumes that fit them well and look like what they're supposed to be. Most like real costumes in real life are kind of crappy looking, but on Happy Days, the costumes are always on point.
They're very big on realism in Happy Days.
I think we should be glad we never saw Jingles the Clown, or did you want to see Jingles the Clown?
I kind of do. But also, I imagine that he's not going to be able to live up to the version of him that lives in my head now. I'm happy just to know that Jingles the Clown exists.
Jingles the Clown is a great name, by the way. It is very foreboding. And at first, I wondered what an ostick was.
An ostick!
But then I realized that the kid was saying stick, like a stick that makes you say
I don't know what the official name for that is.
I think the name I've heard is tongue depressor.
The first thing I thought of was tongue defibrillator, and then I thought, no, that can't be right.
That would be something else. Now I'm thinking of tongue defibrillators. Thank you, Peter, for that. So, Peter, I will ask that age-old timeless question. Was this episode any good?
Yeah, it was. It felt kind of inconsequential and not really big in the grand scheme of things, but it had Fonzie being melodramatic and getting teased by a bunch of small children and then making friends with the small children. So that was pretty delightful. I did like that there were scenes of both Marion and Richie basically telling Fonzie, stop being a baby, go get your tonsils taken out unless you want to be mute for the rest of your life. I like that a lot.
You know what this episode was? Cute. This was a cute episode. This was not necessarily the funniest or the most dramatic episode, but this episode was cute to the nth degree.
It suffers especially when you compare it to the earlier Happy Days Halloween episode, Haunted, which was a very, very fun episode, very clever, even a little bit scary, and this was just cute.
This is definitely showing Happy Days going in the direction of being a show for kids. Obviously, they have him teamed up with 3 kids in this episode. He's basically a children's show host, and it's definitely cute, but Fonzie is very much in danger of losing his street cred at this point in the series. There's very little left of the threatening, menacing hoodlum from season 1. He's now basically a children's entertainer. The upside of this is that Henry Winkler is great at doing this stuff.
He really is.
You know, he's got a real rapport with the kids. The episode is real cute. It's nowhere near as good as Haunted, but you'd have to be a very hard-hearted person to hate Fonselectomy because it's just such an adorable episode that is really just trying so hard to be adorable.
And it's better than My Cousin the Cheat.
We got so much less Chachi this week. That was definitely a plus. So, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful things that we are doing?
Listeners can follow us on Twitter at Fonzie Podcast. They can follow me on Twitter at Volfranx. That's VULFRANX.
And they can follow me on Twitter at Joe_A_Blevins. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysarsours.libsyn.com. And they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysarspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Next week, Richie, Potsy, and Ralph try to live in an apartment together. Cue laugh track.
Sounds like a lot of fun. So, see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.